Good evening. On behalf of AIA Monterey Bay, I want to welcome you to our first lecture for our spring series, Arts and Architecture. I want to thank all of our chapter sponsors, but in particular Compass this time, because they have made this lecture possible through their sponsorship. I'm in general really excited about the engagement of our realtor community. We have a lot of realtors here and also some contractors, because this is really important that we all work together to preserve our heritage in Carmel. And I'm especially excited to have some of our Henry Hill house owners here. So welcome and thank you very much for coming tonight. And last not least, a very warm welcome to all the members from the Carmel Heritage Society. And this was initiated by Thomas Hood. Thank you very much, Thomas. And I want you to briefly speak about Carmel Heritage.
Those steps are a little intimidating. Wow, this is really exciting. For those of you that are not familiar with Carmel Heritage Society, my name is Thomas Hood. I'm the president of the society that was started about 30 years ago. And our mission statement is, it's ours to protect. And tonight, our message from Carmel Heritage is really to attempt what we're going to do over the next 4 lectures. We hope the Carmel Heritage members understand this, is we're looking to demystify what AIA is. AIA is this abstraction for architects, and some people don't even know what the letters mean. But what we want to do is we want to expose our members to modern architecture on the peninsula, and particularly in Carmel, beginning with Henry Hill tonight, and give them an opportunity to view buildings that are hiding really in plain sight. At the same time, maybe learn a little bit about what architects do. So what I'd like to do is extend an invitation to everyone here to come over to our tiny but mighty little museum at 6th and Lincoln on the northwest corner. That was constructed in 1902 by a 17-year-old man by the name of M.J. Murphy. We've got an exhibit that I designed 3 years ago on Henry Hill, so you'll see different photography you'll see in the lecture tonight, but please feel free to come over. The reception is free, and I guarantee you'll be informed, entertained, and can enjoy a glass of great wine and great food. Hope you enjoy the lecture. What I'd like to do now is introduce the head of the lecture series for the season, Eric Dyer.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks everyone for coming. This is our first lecture of the 2020 Arts and Architecture series, and we're calling it Creating the Architecture of the Monterey Peninsula. Is fortunate to have had so many amazing architectural talents who practice here, and many of them are not as well known or appreciated as they should be. We intend to help rectify this with this series, and this will give us an opportunity to learn and celebrate the work of these architects, but there's certainly a lot more than that. So if you haven't already, go to our website, Art and Architecture, AIAMB. And for the other talks coming up, March 10th, we will have Polly Osborne, a wonderful architect in her own right, give a talk on Will Shaw, who's done many works like the 7th and Dolores building, and also this amazing house in Big Sur, which she'll be talking about extensively. April 7th, I will give a talk on my mentor, John Thotis, who has a lot of wonderful homes in this town. And on May 5th, we'll do a talk on George Brooke Cothlow, who did a lot of Clint Eastwood's buildings, including the Eastwood building here in town, and also just amazing works in Big Sur that really meld with the land and using a lot of big timber construction. And to give that talk, it will be Richard Olson, who was senior editor at Architectural Digest and writer of many books, and that will be really a special talk, so I encourage you all to come. And this year, we are going to try out a house tour to help everybody experience some of these great works that you're going to see in the lecture series. So we're putting that together, and that will go up on the website probably in a few weeks. Tonight we focus on the great Henry Hill, who's done many houses in Carmel, but practiced widely. He was part of the second Bay Area tradition of mid-century modernism. And to speak on Henry, we're happy to bring back Pierluigi Serraino, who seems to specialize in bringing to light often little-known, forgotten practitioners and their spectacular works. He is one of the leading writers on mid-century modernism. His books include the 3-volume Modernism Rediscovered, displaying the works photographed by Julius Schulman, and he just recently published a splendid book to document more of the East Coast mid-century modernism, and that's of Ezra Stoller's photography, a photographic history of American architecture. And just an aside note, I would encourage you to follow him on Instagram, where you're almost daily getting some just beautiful gems of mid-century modernism, which you probably never seen before. So with that, I will introduce Pierluigi. Thank you.
Thank you. I am always honored and happy to be here and to see an audience that keeps growing, because this started about 20 plus years ago in a state of almost isolation. There were just a few of us intrigued by this extraordinary legacy that did not seem to resonate with a larger public. I came to this enormous repertoire really through a particular figure, and I said this in the past, but I keep saying it again, and that was Julius Schulman, the great architectural photographer, and through him and his a willingness to open his archive, and there's a certain pattern of how architecture records itself, is remembered, is canonized, and is also ostracized when the times are not quite right. Photographers are associated with particular periods. Modernist or photographers that were dealing with modern architecture could not be the photographers that were dealing with postmodern architecture. And photographers that dealt with postmodern architecture are not good for the new current architecture. So there's a close association between architecture expression, value, and cultural consideration. The case of Henry Hill is particularly telling because he's a classic casualty of a process of not easy access to the right photographs, not a name that is known outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, someone that focused to a large extent to residences, and yet he was a remarkable architect by global standards during his time. I want to start, if technology helps me, with something a little different. It's not a Henry Hill building, but it's about a phenomenon that is going on, and I'm glad that there are real estate agents, brokers, and people in the industry here, because this is like a textbook example of what's going on to a large extent. This is the Fairchild House, one of the great townhouses in New York City. These are the photographs of Robert Damora, a photographer that entered the scene in 1935. He started as a photographer and then became an architect. His archive is in family's hands, and I was working on a project that stalled, but with his son I saw all the work that he did, and we're all wonderful 8x10. So there was this amazing building by George Nelson, who was at the beginning of his career. This was before Herman Miller and all the product design, with an older colleague, William Hamby. This is East 65th Street, a block from Central Park. This was one of the great interiors of New York, very much a project in the vein of Le Corbusier with the Promenade Architecturale. That was highly published and very much revered. And it became part of a sort of iconography almost of film noir in New York. So I was recently in New York to see my son. We went to see it. So this is what's going on. You recognize from the building in the left. It's somewhat still digestible, but it's not the same thing. And so you say, okay, it's the price of the time. They're adding a story. But then when you go inside, something happens. So you start with this first glimpse of the circulation system and some interior decisions that are of a different time to get to this. And you feel the double height, but something is not quite right, and it continues to this. So it is evident that the times are different between current shell and what's going on inside. So it goes on and on. This goes for this townhouse was on the market for $40 million. So there are buyers that are willing to pay $40 million. There are interior decorators that are willing to do this kind of job to this kind of house. And there are real estate agents that are willing to sell this kind of house as a premier house. So something is not quite right in this alignment. And so I'm offering this because this is happening to a lot of different houses that unfortunately, I would say mostly houses, commercial properties are difficult, a little more difficult to reorganize, although they are amenable for a great reintroduction into the city fabric. But buildings obviously are real estate investments. They have to work, they have to function, they are subject to taxes. And so architecture has to encompass all this, still in consonance with the pre-existing condition, if the pre-existing condition is worth anything. So this kind of me being Captain Obvious is not so obvious in the development process. And so we come to Henry Hill, a character who has his lifetime enjoyed significant success and recognition fairly early on. He was born in 1913. He was in England for the first 6 years. He lost his father in some mysterious Louisiana sinking. We don't know much about it, but he seemed very, very attached to his mother, conflicts with his brother, and somehow always surrounded by these female friendships. He was very close to Elizabeth Kendall Thompson, who was the West Coast editor of Architectural Record from 1947 to 1975. And he had a number of also great photographers that were photographing his work. So this, I became aware of the work of Henry Hill as I was working on another book, which I showed the book cover in the past. This is the Upper House in Portola Valley. I saw that there's another upper house here in Carmel, but I am not so sure. I doubt that it's this one because it says in the archivist Portola Valley. Maybe he did another house for the same owner. But these are pretty much objects that are profoundly intertwined with the landscape. So Henry Hill is consistently committed to this one ideal space where he's working together with the landscape architect, although he will come up with some odd notions of almost supremacy in the development process, as the architect is the leader, is this and that, but not in reality. He wrote about this, and I will quote some of it, but his buildings are only fully integrated environments. And he worked very closely with Garrett Ekbo and Roy Royston, and most of his projects had always a strong landscape component. So large houses, very, not as many infill projects as you might think, although there are some in the repertoire available, and a very free, unencumbered design expression, unencumbered from concerns with modernity per se or quoting any particular kind of architect. He just went on his own exploring the fascination with wood and siding. They were not particularly expensive houses, although they were grand houses. For single family, for families of 3, 4, 5, a very plain type of program with often a musical component. He was very interested in music and symphonies. He was not a particularly sports type of a gentleman. So this was the book that sort of put me in contact with Henry Hill. There is no book on Henry Hill. There is some kind of understanding of the value of these houses, especially in the Bay Area. Same goes for someone like Roger Lee. A lot fewer people know about Francis Joseph McCarty, but the Henry Hill houses are fairly sought after. To a large extent, it's also part of this book, but it's sort of, this book, Norcal Mod, came already when the interest on mid-century modern was pretty widespread. So I'm always glad to share some of these files. They come from the creativity study that was done in Berkeley in 1959, and I will always owe gratitude to Raymond Neutra, who's here in the audience, who told me at the Oakland airport, I found the files of my father, I think you should check this material, because it was really a gold mine of information at all sorts of levels. So Henry Hill was invited to be part of this creativity study. They invited 40 of the most creative architects in the United States. They came in a group of 10. And they went through 3 days of extensive testing, 22 hours of procedures. Then they came home. They went home. They had to fill out other files. So this is the handwriting of Henry Hill. In December 1958, he's 46 years old, and he tells us he's 5'10" and 175, and that he had 2 children. He was married 11 years. And what type of community was it where you were born? Very nice. It seems like kind of a upbeat and always with a smile. He got a B as a grade average. Then he went to study at UC Berkeley to get his architecture. He was a particularly brilliant student. He got a B. But then he went to Harvard from 1937 to 1938 to get a Master of Architecture. At that time, 37 is really when Gropius arrived, Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus. So he catches that moment. I actually met Mario Ciampi, some of you may know for all of his concrete work, who arrived in Harvard before Gropius, and it was all kind of Beaux-Arts system. They were talking about John Russell Pope, and it was a totally different environment. So the arrival of Gropius at Harvard jolted really the system of education. And Henry Hill, although he was never a hardcore kind of modernist in the sense of an architect like Don Olson that some of you may know, who designed Worcester Hall and many of the houses in the Bay Area, he was nonetheless tied to that tradition. And so then from here we see his professional career. And he started with John Aiken Dinwiddie. John Aiken Dinwiddie was a really, really, really talented architect who unfortunately suffered from alcoholism. And he sort of progressively faded from the scene, but he was particularly talented early on. And his archive is sort of nowhere to be found. It's a tragedy, but obviously tied to the construction company. You will see in here a really important name between 1945 and 1947, and this name here is Eric Mendelssohn Dinwiddie Hill. We'll see more about Mendelssohn shortly. He says at that time he has plus or minus 200 houses done. I mean, this is a fellow who is 46 years old, has 200 houses done at that time. He said that by the end of his life, on December 5th, 1985, he says, the bio says 500 houses. It's a lot of houses. And then a dubious building, the Longshoreman Union Building in San Francisco, which is still standing. It's a building that was part of an invited competition, which has really quite a questionable design expression. I'm sure many of you have seen the building, but it's quite an unremarkable building compared to what he has done. And there's this chapel in Moline, Illinois, which he was very fond of. I have personally never seen these. I've seen a few of these houses. So we know that in these files where they were asking very direct questions, they ask some really critical ones that tell them where they reveal to the researcher, to themselves, what their contribution to modern architecture is. And so list those things which you have done, which you consider innovation in the field of architectural design, expression of a concept of space, total site limitations rather than a series of boxes to peek out. So that's his contribution. He's fond of symphony and little symphony. Somehow he's connected to music quite a bit. He will keep saying that. So this is Eric Mendelssohn. Why do we care about Eric Mendelssohn? Because Eric Mendelssohn designed this building, which was the first building that gave expressionism an architectural form. I recently got a little closer to the life of Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn was blind in one eye and was blind in one eye, was almost blind from in the other eye. So he would make sketches that were 1/64 of an inch. Was really, really, in scale, really, really, really small. And then they would blow them up in their office, and they were able to build plans, sections, and elevations from those visions. Of course, so very, very highly detailed. And both Henry Hill and his fellow associate, who will become a partner, John Cruz, were in the office of Erich Mendelssohn. So there is a connection to some of the forms that Mendelssohn had into the forms of the practice of Hill and Cruz. So this is the first house that sort of gave notoriety to Henry Hill. It was actually a house by John Aiken DeWitty, the Rose House. It got featured prominently in a Life magazine article on San Francisco Bay Area houses in 1949. They were was one of the first coverage in color of this. A very unique house in terms of its where it sits on the slope of the San Francisco hills with forms that had never been seen before. And very close to it, there's going to be another house that Henry Hill will design later when he goes on his own. So some of these images, which are quite rare in color, Life magazine, I mean, the Life archives are almost impenetrable. Technically, they're online, but no one understands how to browse them. Even the Life editors don't understand how to do it. So it was miraculous that I was able to pull out this. A house that set a lot of conversations, emotions was the Detner House in Mount Tamalpais. This house appeared in the catalog of the Bay Area Region Domestic Architecture, which was a sort of a counter-argument that Worcester, Louis Mumford, and at the time Elizabeth Kendall Thompson made against a particular strand of modern architecture was coming from the international style. The idea at that time was that at least in Mumford's words, that there was a more humane way of doing architecture, and the architects that were working on the West Coast, coming from the lineage of Maybeck and John Galen Howard, so he was mixing very different traditions altogether. Worcester should be looked at more closely, and Henry Hill was put into that bunch together with Gardner Daly, Francis Joseph McCarthy, and Fred and Lois Langhorst, and a few others. This particular building with the photographs of Roger Sturtevant appeared in the Architectural Review. This particular debate went throughout Europe, and the Bay Area became an alternative to the growing European modernism. There were many different strands of modernism already available. I mean, my contention is that modernism is really an eclectic form, because Albert Kahn and Wright and Neutra and Cliff May are all forms of modernism, but very, very different from each other to a large extent. So a house that was designed without a landscape architect by for the specific directives of the owner, but it is essentially always open to the outside. In the project descriptions, there's always mention of these commanding views of the Bay Area. So clearly, in returning to the Bay Area, he takes advantage of the site and he establishes a stronger relationship with the outdoors. There are online some obscure archives of people that pulled out slides from some nameless travelers that were scouting the areas. So on Flickr, there are projects from this period that are not called out specifically with the art, but I know this is the Detner House because I recognize the flagstone and the underside. So there was even a color scheme there going on. Another house that was particularly important was the Herspring House, also part of the same catalog. The landscape architects had a stronger, in this case was Roy Royston and Gary Ekbo, were a lot more present even in the narrative. I just want to remind you that these are the ubiquitous Femme Couple green chair that you'll see in all the pictures of this period. They were seen among the first time in the famous picture of the Kaufman House in Palm Springs that Schulman took in 1947, I believe. Was it 47 or 49, Raymond? I can't remember. Was 47, exactly. So that created a high demand of Femme Couple green chairs among photographers for sure, because it became identified into that. So it's a house for, a big house for people who had no kids. It's quite a curious combination, but very open to the outside. You will see how many bedrooms. It was just a couple. I don't understand why they had all these different people. One of the oddities of Henry Hill that he wasn't often putting doors in his houses. Definitely he didn't do it in some of his houses, but also in some of his clients' houses. So these are some color images from that same Life magazine archive. Always open to nature. These tubular elements were shared to a large extent by architects in Southern California. Raphael Soriano certainly used them to a great degree. Another house, in a way, these were, Henry Hill at the time was always known primarily for the houses. There were few shops that he did. He did very commercial buildings. I don't know of any schools that he ever did. So the houses, and very few townhouses that I'm aware of. So this is another house that has a similar plan. It's a U-shaped plan from the Detner house, but takes advantage of the site. Great efforts not to cut any trees at all, and just staying with the topography of the land. And so this is a house for a family of two daughters who were going to have one room and two boys in separate rooms, and we're all playing instruments, and they were having little kind of orchestras going on in that. So great emphasis on the outdoor areas. Again, this is another project done with Ekbo and Royston. The Foster House, some of these images are difficult or not of great quality because they were taken from photocopies that I took at the time when I did my research in the archive. The challenge of the three main photographers of Henry Hill is that the Roger Sturtevant archive is in the Oakland Museum of California, which has a very limited images available, although the archive is in there. They don't allow anyone to go in the back room. The Ernie Braun archive is in the house of Ernie Braun, and the gatekeeper is Jonathan Braun, who's a very nice gentleman, but you have to nag him and go to Mill Valley, and it's just hard to do this for 100,000 images. So obviously the images don't circulate. I mean, he's known for the Eichler homes, but the Eichler homes are just a fraction of what Ernie Braun did, who was a superlative photographer. And the other one is Morley Bear. And Morley Bear, the archive is UC Santa Cruz. You have to go to a special collection. They pull out 2 boxes at a time. So that means no circulation of images. There's kind of basic logistical things that have nothing to do with the content of the archive, which explains why the images of Schulman are so ubiquitous, why the images of Stoller are so available, because they're better organized to be broadcast. So the Foster House is another significant house in Orinda. These were houses that, what's remarkable about Henry Hill is that he could range from a 600-foot house to a 10,000 square foot house with equal ease. This was someone that was always drawing himself together with John Cruz, and who was with him since 1948. and in 65 it became a partner, and then there were 2 draftsmen and a part-time secretary. So it was a very small operation, so there a very close, tight relationship with the design. And this is a significant undertaking. Great importance to the space of arrival with the car, but you will see that it's hard to separate the house from the siding, from the way it's anchored to the ground. There's no space that doesn't have some kind of formal definition. And the photographers were responding clearly to that, as well as the press. He got innumerable awards for these kind of projects. Plans that were never repeated. I mean, he wasn't a kind of a cookie cutter type of architect. He wasn't formulaic. He wasn't staying on module maniacally. It was really the conditions of the site that were determining the design expression. And so to do this for many other houses, for so many houses, it's quite remarkable. So these are some from the same obscure archive, some color images. And from that same set of Xeroxes that I had, the archive of Henry Hill and also John Cruz is at UC Berkeley, at the Environmental Design Archives. It's accessible. And a lot of the work, when the pictures are not available in the archive of Henry Hill, are available in the archives of Gary Ekbo and Roy Royston. But that's a good thing about having photographers and landscape architects working together. So another house, Kent Woodlands. Most of these projects were done in an arc of 10 years. Always with unique plans, unique sections, unique conditions tied to a large extent the saving of trees. So he was mapping the trees, and he was always committed to never cutting them down. So there is a commitment to the site that precedes the current anxiety toward the environment. But it also explains the longevity of many of these buildings. The challenge, and it's another kind of sort of Captain Obvious statement, is that a residence is a private world, and it becomes a part of the public domain through an image, but it's inaccessible to the general public. So the experience of space, which is such a critical part of that, is the privilege of the few. And for someone like Henry Hill, as opposed to someone like Eero Saarinen, someone that Henry Hill admired, it's a completely different ballgame. There's a much broader audience. So it might be that Henry Hill produced a much larger volume of buildings than Eero Saarinen, but it's not going to be able to be seen. So great articulation for the plans. This kink in here is to maximize the view. You will see all these changes of levels that are part of taking advantage of the sections and the terrain. So another house, this one appeared in Arts and Architecture as well. Another Morley Bear image. Often these, to avoid the flattening of sites or clearing the sites, he would come up with these very odd plans, very angled and strip-like, but always privileging sight lines, and creating as much as possible light, but respecting nature. You always see these trees that are able to go inside the house, and he will do this also in this house in Carmel. So this actually, I take this. Oh, this is I apologize. This is a portion of the Kurt Upper house, which was the house that we saw the first time. So this still in Portola Valley was 1965. So very sort of plain, simple, but carefully crafted houses. Someone that was working along those, in the same vein was John Funk, who wasn't as prolific as Henry Hill, but enjoyed equal national standing, especially in curatorial environments and museums. So this is a house that I personally visited, and it was owned by Derek Parker. Derek Parker entered in Taschen and Allen in '64, kind of took over the firm where Bob Taschen died shortly after. Actually, he arrived in 1960. And I went to visit him when I was working in Taschen and Allen, and I said, I would love to come and see you again because I have this lecture on Henry Hill. Well, the house was raised. I sold it, and as soon as we sold it, because it was in Kentfield and the land was more valuable than the house, it was just torn down. So it was a beautiful house. I don't have some great pictures, but it was wonderfully integrated into the site. So very, very accessible with this wonderful door. I mean, I remember vividly how iconic this door was at the time when I entered. And some interesting brickwork that will reappear later in his work. So this is a sketch that I don't know if he saw himself like this, but it showed some turbulence in some of the writing, some concerns that he had. And I'm bringing some of these statements to your attention. Our fundamentals are so simple: orientation, use, circulations, proportions, and scale. We must express them with thought and with sensitivity. Then we shall have an ordered architecture, and not an order of cold precision, but the order of knowledge. So it was particularly committed to the idea of knowledge in action. He will mention a lecture that he attended by Ernesto Nathan Rogers, the founder of BBPR, the Italian architect that did the Velasca Tower in Milan and many other buildings, and he was also the director of Casabella, a sort of iconic figure. Henry Hill, incidentally, taught at Stanford. Stanford had an architecture school between 1947 and 1968. And I remember speaking with the widow of Henry Hill, and he said that in '68, students were just not interested in architecture at all as an art form. He could not get anyone to just do some basic drawings and basic details. So he stopped from what she was telling me, he stopped teaching altogether. So this is the book, The Creative Architect. And in this book, I remember going with great interest in many of the files, of which a few more are going to be shown. But then I'm going to play a few segments of a very animated conversation that Henry Hill will have with some fellow architects on how to deal with a client who wants to impose design decisions. So the architect must become the leader. All others follow the engineer, the landscape architect, sculptor, painter, above all the client. So that's kind of an interesting statement in view of what he's going to say later. Some odd things. So Henry Hill was interviewed by this fellow called Spiceman in Berkeley. And they were writing the report. And I highlighted some parts. Mr. Hill is pleasant and cheerful. His mannerisms are definitely effeminate. His gestures are expressive but somewhat precious and showy. And he's not above rolling his eyes and throwing up his hands to emphasize an exclamation. His speech pattern also is of this nature, reminiscent of a Hollywood stereotype of the gossiping housewife. His soft, rotund appearance is in contradiction with the strength he exhibits in interpersonal relations. He has for years demonstrated a certain kind of strength and independence of action. Homosexuality, probably latent or at least a feminine identification, is one important element. He was brought up by his mother, idealized her, and even consciously patterned some of his behavior after her example. His important relations with men have been disturbed and disrupted repeatedly in ways that are reminiscent of the heated, gossipy, orally aggressive relationship with other homosexuals. Now, I don't know, there might be people that knew him. And I don't know if you agree with that, but that was the reading. And obviously, Henry Hill didn't read any of this stuff. It was interesting to show the files to the only surviving architect of this experiment, Victor Lundy, as he was reading how people were looking at himself. It was very entertaining. But I think that Henry Hill might have a different reaction. So here are some questions that were asked. How would you define creative achievement in architecture? Quickly, it is personal expression done as well as possible. It requires intensity of effort to bring together all the aspects of what are essentially human problems. How you see what are the significant factors in determining the creativeness of an architect. It is the unique solution for all of the elements of the problem. I take the view that there's only one solution for every given problem. Usually it is simplicity or something like that which achieves a creative act. And to a large extent, the intelligibility of those spaces is one of its Henry Hill's strengths without giving away originality. So then they were ranking themselves. So Henry Hill, who thought very highly of Eero Saarinen, put Eero Saarinen as number 1. He put him at number 6. Ashley and Allen was number 2 for him. Number 3 was Ernest Born. And 4, Errol Harris, and 5, Pietro Belluschi. And I was shocked to see this. Don't know enough of the others to evaluate. He did not know what Louis Kahn was doing, which was really astonishing at that time because he was already quite well known. But he put Jacques Warnicke, who was already a questioned architect by many, although he had his own talents at 28, so obviously they were not best friends. What did Eero Saarinen think about Henry Hill? Let's see. It was number 30, so was not on top of his list. But probably, I don't know, maybe because of his residential output, he didn't think he was necessarily mainstream. Clearly in the list of the selected architects, there's a strong component from the Bay Area. Let's see, these are the mosaics. There's going to be an exhibit in New York on November 10th on this whole study. So this is what one of the graphic examples that there were, or procedures that they were going to entertain. They had 30 minutes to come up with a design with using all the tiles from a very selected group. And he decided to go to some whimsical pattern, and he explained some of what he did in here. And I am sort of eager to go to let's go to the, Sebastian, to the recording. The reason why I would like for you to hear this is because you feel the kind of strength of conviction that Henry Hill has. We have segments for up to 10 minutes. We'll see how much we can endure. The first 2 are the exposition of the problem. So why don't we start? In this particular group, there is Henry Hill. There's Oskar Storanov, who was the first partner of Louis Kahn. And there was Robert Alexander, who was a partner for a period with Richard Neutra. And I believe there's O'Neill Ford, but I'm not so sure. And there's a 5th fellow that I don't know who is. So can we start?
Is the Rock Problem, Architects 2, Group 2, January 10th.
Is it too loud?
Now, for the next,
Can we put it a little lower?
20 minutes or so, we'd like to hear your views about a problem that, although hypothetical, embodies some issues important for architects as well as those in many other fields. I'm going to read the problem to you and ask you to first indicate your personal reaction on a slip of paper.
Can you hear?
Which I'll then collect. Then we'd like you to discuss the issue candidly among yourselves and reach a joint conclusion at the end of this 20-minute period. This is the problem. Mr. Brown is faced with a difficult decision. He's just finished his preliminary drawings for a very challenging and important structure. His client has told him that he likes Mr. Brown's proposal very much and will accept it if he will change one fairly important aspect of the design. The client would like it altered in a specific way. Brown has tried as hard as he can to persuade his client to his point of view, but to no avail. His client still feels strongly about it and tells Brown that while he is very pleased with his design, he will have to reject it if the change isn't made. Brown's sense of architectural quality is greatly disturbed by the alteration his client demands. Most of what he feels about visual form, design, function, and beauty would be violated if the design were changed. On the other hand, the commission is a highly prized one, since it is to be an interesting, challenging, and prominent structure. He feels that in addition to being an architect, he is in business and has a clear obligation to please his client, since after all, he is paying for the structure, and he'll have to live with it. And as a practical matter, he has a responsibility to support himself and those who depend upon him. As he is weighing these factors, the phone rings and the client asks for his answer. If you were Brown, what would you do? Would you please indicate
So
on this piece of
at this
paper?
point, they have to come up with one answer, and there are 5 architects who think very independently on what to do. So imagine that. So can we hear the first segment? So have you guys understood the challenge? Yeah. So the client wants to make a change, the architect refuses what to do. Okay?
No,
Design.
Ryan's meddling in something he doesn't know anything
It gives
about.
another step. No.
Well, I don't think I'd take the point of view. I would just say no.
I would.
Well, this has supposedly gone through all the
big
proceedings.
Yes, it's already been hashed over.
He's now calling for your decision.
You're trying to educate the client, you refuse to be educated. So to hell with him.
No, there must be further.
This is Every Hill.
Right.
Well, I don't think that there's
There is
no
still
question
a
about that.
misunderstanding.
There's a misunderstanding.
Client is a reasonable person.
Sometimes.
No, other than there's something lacking.
But the way the question was put to us,
There's
No, there can, he can.
He just
you
asked
can
him
have
for a
him.
simple
You
answer.
can ask him to come in.
Well, you've already done that.
Then you can do it again. Then
First thing
it has not
I think
been
that you have
resolved.
done it, Hill, I
The
think that
assumption is you've already worked
you
the
have
guy
done that
over.
3 times. you
No,
see.
because if he still demands it, he is still, it is still open for reason.
No, not if you call,
No,
if
you
he
sound
calls
like
you
a
on the
stubborn
phone.
client.
He wants a yes, no, over the phone.
No, I think you can reach a common understanding.
Of what?
If you try.
Of what?
You've got to try harder. Of a reason.
But he wants an answer, yes or no.
He is paying for your services. You are not performing to him if
do
you
we
haven't
have any
fulfilled your
reference at all
function.
to the script here?
I can read it over if you like.
Let's read it
Yeah,
once
and I
more
think
because
this, no,
Mr. Hill,
because what Hill just said is very, very
thinks
important.
he's got another year to
He
work
said-
on this.
No, Hill
no, not
said
at all.
the client is paying for the service and therefore he is entitled to education, to all the education that he possibly can get, and you have to bend over backwards.
The client's trying to be
Exactly.
the architect.
There must be a
He shouldn't meddle with it.
But if he understands, then he will let you loose.
If he hired you, he must have confidence in you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then why does he try to change your views?
Because there's
He
a
obviously
misunderstanding.
he obviously hasn't confidence in you.
Well, then you can build that up. You can make another try.
But the assumption is you've
No,
already
it
made a
isn't.
try.
No, it isn't.
Well, maybe we ought to hear again the.
What is leading up to the telephone conversation? I have had this situation half a dozen
Oh,
times.
yes.
See? What is leading up, Mr. Baron, what is leading up to that?
So so you can see how he's fighting for the client. I mean, he's the only one, I have to say, of all the recordings. Someone that also advocated for the client was Don Emmons, fighting off all the architects. But for someone that showed such a signature hand to be so pro-client instead of thinking of a violation is quite a remarkable, and it's very animated. You can tell that he's fighting off everybody. Can we hear this next segment?
He does not understand.
As an architect already, but
not really.
You can.
He doesn't understand.
You can reinvest confidence.
Now wait a minute. Is this a question?
No, he hasn't lost confidence. It's a natural thing.
Wait a minute. Let's get back to the other side. They have posed the problem of architectural practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they say,
integrity.
No, I think it's mostly architectural practice. If we take it with a chip on the shoulder and call it architectural integrity, then we are giving them, as the client, all the ammunition. They are posing it as a question of architectural practice.
No. Principle. A matter of principle.
You see?
You're talking about the technique, how do you handle it? This is something
No,
entirely different.
I'm not. No, the client is paying for your service. He wants the best you have to give. If he doesn't understand why you have done something...
Is he a judge of your service? No.
No, but he must have understanding.
Listen, an architectural contract does not include educating the client into architecture.
Human relationships do.
No, they don't.
Why should he come and give you something and blindly accept whatever you tell him to do?
You go to your surgeon and tell him how to take out your appendix. You go to your lawyer and tell him how to defend his case.
That is
you
a
go
specialized skill, which I respect his judgment. The client expects my specialized skill and to respect my judgment. This is something he doesn't understand.
No, but you don't argue with your dentist, you don't argue with your lawyer, you don't argue with your... Of course you do.
But
you
I
can.
might want to understand what the dentist does.
Let me put it this way. I just had this kind of an experience with a public body, which is very, very difficult, with a public authority. And I said, and we went through 3 entirely different stages of development.
Let's go to the last one, because they have to come up with a conclusion. And so Henry Hill is unwilling to accept the 5 options that they are given. We have to write a 6th option. And that will allow us to bring the lecture to a closure.
It's understanding.
No,
it's certainly not on the telephone.
You're talking about technique of how to do it. And
don't forget.
No, I'm talking about reaching the client.
The client
is
issuing you an ultimatum.
There has to be a participation.
Don't forget, that's already been passed.
But do you say you're going to do it?
If there is the complete understanding and he still gives the ultimatum, then I withdraw, yes.
Right,
but I don't think it is at that stage, and I think it'd be a disastrous thing at that point to say no.
Oh, well, wait a minute. The question
you should come in and you should discuss it and try to make it
The assumption is that has already taken place.
No, well, I won't accept that assumption because he likes
that's the man
design.
that wrote the program.
And if he understands that the design is based upon this, that it'll completely unraveled, why would he give up the whole for the specific?
Well, it's like the curate's egg. When he got a bad egg,
and if
how was your egg? He said parts of it are very good.
What if in the discussion the client proves to be right? The architect isn't infallible. Maybe he is completely right. And this one thing proves to be the design is wrong. Then the architect would be a fool not to listen.
Well, the assumption is, I think, that we've gone through the educational stage of the client.
On what basis do you make that assumption?
Well, he likes part of it.
He likes the whole thing except a detail.
Or is he
no, not a detail.
A major
an essential part.
This is a matter of principle.
Is he a judge?
No, he doesn't understand.
Okay. I think we got the gist. It's clearly the only one, and he will win this 6th option that we'll write down. But this took place in 1958. No, it was actually in 1959 because it was 4 different weekends that this took place. And although he signed, he filled out some of the forms, then later he came there were different stages at different times where architects were involved, but that they came between December 1958 and April 1959. So it's great to hear the energy. It's great to feel how these characters are fighting for their turf. But in the end, it's not that Henry Hill is service-oriented, but he puts always the human aspect of the client first, which I find remarkable because the houses do speak to that individuality. There's not one house that looks like the next. So in 1971, he moved to Carmel, but he was already coming down quite a bit. He did several houses. I actually don't have the full list of the... there is an Excel sheet from the Environmental Design Archives about the work, but I cannot say it's always complete because I've seen other parts that are missing. There are several hundred projects, but I cannot say there are 500 houses. And I don't know how many of them are actually in Carmel. That's a challenge that happens when, for someone like Henry Hill, who did so much work, you come upon one of his houses, but there's no book on Henry Hill, and you're not so sure that it's a Henry Hill house. What are you going to do? How are you going to handle this? Are you going to tear it down because you can have twice as much square footage, or are you going to leverage the art value of the house because by buying a Henry Hill house, you have an original of a particular vintage at a moment where architecture gave some of its best results in the 20th century. And to a large extent, there was a time that architecture spoke Italian, then it spoke French, but in the post-war period, it was definitely speaking American English. It wasn't speaking British English, and to a large extent, it was also in California. So you have, when you have a Henry Hill house, a house of this particular vintage, you have a part of a huge legacy. So moving forward, so the simplicity of these houses continue to be part of this, of their cachet. Very just fundamentally committed to the land, with some interest that is brought in, but nothing that is fancy, nothing that is extraneous to the culture of the place per se. This is his own house that is on a site that it must be somewhere around here. I don't know if someone has seen the house, but apparently it's, the core of the house is all the way back to the site, and it creates this very protected environment. It's all stacked through a series of screens, and you can see in here how this tree that was already there is just a part of the architecture. The architecture was built around it. There are some sliding doors, but there are fundamentally no doors in this house except for the guests. And now you can see how the house is all the way to the side. There's a view of the bay going in this direction, and the tree that we were looking at is right in here. But again, no doors anywhere. So this is a house that I saw last year, and it's quite beautiful. I can't wait to see the end results. We should be close. I haven't seen the publication of this house. I am showing this because I became aware of it through Marianne Chiquetan's. But I have to say it's a house which was his own house, another house that is filled with a lot of precious moments, a lot of unfortunately, this is out of focus. It's part of two other houses that are in there. And I found on the notes there was a handwritten list that he was grouping them together, and they must have appeared in a publication in 1963. But again, it's filled with great spaces, micro spaces. It's very open. It has a great section, but also has a great dignity as you enter the space. It's a house that reveals its beauty just by navigating it. And even though the pictures are beautiful, they don't do justice to the richness that the house has. And this beautiful axis of the fireplace on which the house almost seems to pivot is a very, very strong vertical axis. And so again, John Cruz, it was one of his, his most powerful ally, and I wanted to bring this in his, in this particular bio of his. That he also worked for Mario Corbett, who was an extremely important architect. Mario Corbett trained Charles Moore, who designed Sea Ranch. Eric Bull went through Mario Corbett and many others. And then he was with Mendelssohn, Dinwiddie and Hill. And then when Mendelssohn split, it was a very brief partnership of which there were no projects of any kind. Then he stayed with Mendelssohn. And in '48, the office of Erich Mendelssohn had about 8 people. So it must have been a very close relationship. It was there for 2 years. The office was on Commercial Street. And apparently there was even a full-time model maker. So although I am unaware of models made in the office of Henry Hill, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. And so this is Henry Hill in one of his, these are pictures that were given to me by the son of Jack Wagstaff, the campus architect at UC Santa Cruz. His father took slides of people visiting Cal Poly, and so this was him. Few lasting remarks. Architecture is the three-dimensional expression and realization of a culture. At its finest, it is the complete expression of all man's knowledge, experience, and beliefs. It is knowledge in action. The walls is now a screen to define, solid, void, flexible, obscure, grill, or even a curtain of glass. Glass not for its own self, but for what it gives. So these are pictures that I found in the archive of Roger Sturtevant of Henry Hill houses. Beautiful stuff, but again, the Roger Sturtevant archive has a significant memory of California modernism in Northern California. And I do hope at some point there will be a monograph on Henry Hill that will showcase some of his work, which is really super imaginative. So the idea of the screens is continues to enter his work. This was his first house. I mean, the house for himself in Berkeley was a big drop from being accessed from the street. You can see the furniture of Alvar Aalto right here. So it was already committed. Very, very tight houses, virtually no corridors, no circulation areas. This is another house that appeared in a very famous anthology of houses by Monica Pigeon and Theo Crosby. Monica Pigeon was the editor of Architectural Design for a very long time, a magazine in the UK. Very different from anything that you've seen before, but it shows that the vocabulary of Henry Hill was quite varied. A dental clinic that I saw in San Anselmo is still there. The screens are not there, but the building is pretty much intact. With again here no doors in the surgical rooms, and a triangular courtyard, all custom-made furniture, and again Ekbo and Roy Royston as the landscape architects. This is another house in a townhouse in San Francisco, which is still standing. It's on Kearny Street. And I will close with this house, which I'm extremely fond of. It's a house that is 600 square feet on a site that is 41 by 45. And it's on it was for a widow, a writer who had a collection of Victorian furniture and a big collection of books. And she wanted to have a view. So virtually no particular piece of land, but you see you arrive here, and it's beautifully organized because you arrive here, and there is the living room, the kitchen is on the left. You go up some steps in a studio where she can write, and then there's the bedroom and the bathroom. I mean, again, you enter in the center of the house with no furniture. This is the view, but I mean, with no circulation, this is the view, and that's the Victorian furniture that she had. But this is a spectacular sight. I mean, and I love this because it shows that there was a moment where San Francisco and modern architecture were in good terms, right? That you don't have to have a bay window, you don't have to have a Victorian, you don't have to have, there's nothing with pitched roofs, but there's also nothing wrong with this in the kind of spaciousness that it gives. I looked for this house many times. I suspect that it's no longer there because it should be visible from Coit Tower. But that's pretty much it. So thank you.